It's a topic I've been meaning to address for a while. To do with the classical world. This is something that needs to be taken a bit more seriously by pagans. Um, when you visit, say, Stonehenge or Avebury or Evora or Tara or Newgrange or Carnac or the Ring of Brogner, Scarra Bray, you're aware, okay, so that relates to my pagan past, because you assume that because you live in northwestern Europe, your ancestors came from Western Europe, that's not your heritage. And that sets aside other things, like for instance, you go to Greece or Italy or Iberia and you see these magnificent Roman, or you go to Greece and Turkey, Turkish pagan temples and shrines, and you say to yourself, well, that's not me. Well, it is, and the reason why you think that's not part of your heritage is because academia has had for about 200 years a complete and total fetish with ancient Greek and Roman civilization, to the point where they're almost like honorary Christians and they're not talked about in pagan terms. When was you never, when you hear like someone talk about Julius Caesar or the symposium in Greece, in Athens, you never hear them talk about that Julius Caesar was a pagan, that Plato was a pagan, Socrates were pagans, that Archimedes were pagans, that Marcus Aurelius was a pagan. They're never discussed that way, and you can watch any documentary about them and they will never ever mention that they're pagans. They will always talk about them in the sense that like they're one of us, and inevitably you get some professor from Christ College in Cambridge or Mary Magdalene University in Oxford talking about them, but never bringing up the fact that they were pagans ever. It's really played down, majorly played down. Where the barbarians, on the other hand, so you might have the enemies of Rome, the Gauls, the Celts, the Dacians, they're always portrayed as pagans. It's to deliberately take the intelligence of pagans away from themselves. So for instance, if they have to acknowledge that Greek and Roman pagans were extremely advanced and high of intelligence, they're going to have to do the same to the Dacians, the Celts, the Gauls, the North, the Teutons, the Iberians, the Goths, a lot, the Lusitanians. They're going to have to do it to them too, because you cannot have it in isolation, because Europe is not that big. And these cultures, we see the only thing that we know about the cultures predominantly comes from Roman propagandists like Pliny and Julius Caesar. Back to him again. But if you look at the religions of Rome and Greece, they were not that different than the pagan religions of the so-called uncivilized Europe. They still held the belief of sacrifice, that attainment of godhood, a very magical idea, was achieved while they were on this earth, and this is why Roman emperors were seen as gods. This is why great heroes in epics that were based on real people were seen as gods. You remember, like, the city of Troy was found in the Iliad. No one believed that existed. They thought that was mythology, and it was a real place, and they used the so-called mythology to find it. And the academics, they talk about Rome and Greece, blah, blah, blah. And they talk about them in terms of them being seen as being honorary Christians, in the Christian world, that they were too good to be pagans. No, they were too good to be fucking Christians. That's what they really were. And the collapse of Greece and the collapse of Rome, from the moment these filthy, backward, knuckle-scraping vermin from the Assyrian desert came into the classical world and started attacking the Greek temples in the Middle East and in Egypt, that it was over. They spread like a cancer and a virus, and eventually came into Europe and destroyed all of pagan Europe. As Catherine Nixby in The Darkening Age points out, there were 35 million pagans. There's not one left alive today, other than the ones like become neo-pagans or call ourselves pagans. But there's none that can actually claim their heritage right back. It doesn't exist. They've all been Christianized or Islamicized in between our pagan ancestors and today. And then we're told that Christianity was a great benevolent. It wasn't. It was a more just like you look at Magor about Hypatia. That's what happened. No, she was just one of thousands, not just an isolated case of specific barbarity. And even today, when you go online and you hear people saying, "Oh, I would love to know what happened at what was in the Library of Alexandria could have been saved," and you look at this person's page and they're a Christian. It was their fucking Christian ancestors who killed Hypatia and destroyed the library, but they don't want to accept it. They don't want to accept it. They want to believe that Christianity is a religion of love and peace. It's all lies. It's a murderous death cult spread into Europe by the dregs of the Middle East. They were even scum by Middle Eastern standards. This is why the Jews were terrified of them. They were castrating themselves. They referred to non-Christians as Gentiles because they saw themselves as Jews. They saw themselves, until probably near the Middle Ages, they were still saw themselves as Second Temple rabbinical Jews. This schism between Christianity and Judaism didn't really take off until close to the Middle Ages. That's when it started, and that was for another reason. That was the kind of that was increasing the power of the Vatican as a state and an empire as much as an actual religious idea. It's like the Rome and Greece was destroyed by the Christians, destroyed, absolutely ruined. We only have something like 30% of the science and literature of the Greek classical world. The other 70% was burnt by Christians or used as toilet paper. And the only reason we have the 30% that survived is because they were carrying the manuscripts to the last of the Greek philosophers. Literally, and it literally was like a movie or something. They left Athens on the day that the Christians were actually going on rampages in the city, and they carried them to Persia, where they remained safe until Islam, and then they came back to Europe. Now, the Christians don't want to think, Christian learning, Christian science. No, it's all pagan, all of it. Every single one thing of it is pagan. You stole it all. You stole all the pagan learning, all the pagan science, all the pagan knowledge and architecture. Even things like that they hold up sacred within Christianity, like the great cathedral. The flying buttress was invented by pagan Romans. It wasn't invented by Christians. I mean, they were and then the artwork. Let's talk about the artwork. There was pagans frantically burying beautiful marble and alabaster statues under the ground, so Christians couldn't get on their hands at them because they would smash them with hammers, saying there was demons inside them. That's why the Elgin marbles from the Parthenon now in London have their faces smashed up. It was Christians climbing up there with hammers and smashing them to kill the demons in them. And the only intact works we have were deliberately buried under the ground by pagans to protect them from Christians, and that's why there was a big craze. They had like a classical revival of the Renaissance, which is the Renaissance of pagan Europe. They were digging up these statues and saying, "My God, our ancient ancestors were incredible artists." You look at the artwork of the Christians; it was a joke. It was like literally horrible. It was terrible. They didn't even understand perspective or anything. The pagans of ancient Europe had conquered that. And as for the rest of Europe, everything was probably built in wooden statues that were probably Tara in Ireland, I'm sure, looked like Rivendell in Lord of the Rings. The stave churches of Norway give us an insight into what was, and they burnt it all to the ground and put the people in mud huts and told them they were always primitive until Christianity. And then they built colossal churches in massive cities with no sanitation and straw huts, and people died of disease, where the pagans, the Romans and Greeks, they built sanitation systems. It wasn't necessary in Northern Europe because the climate is quite different and people lived differently. They didn't cluster in large cities as much. They generally had an agrarian agricultural society. There was no necessity for sanitation to the same degree that you had in the classical world. And then the academics act as if that was all not pagan. Not pagan. I guarantee you, if there's a documentary on the BBC, Discovery Channel, History Channel, wherever channel tonight, Netflix, a docudrama, they will discuss every single aspect of the majesty of ancient Greece and Rome, and they'll never ever touch on the fact that they were pagans like you and me, and not Christians like them.